There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when you realize your life has just pivoted on an axis you didn't even see turning. And I remember that silence vividly, because it happened on a Monday morning in the middle of a quarterly review meeting that I had spent 3 weeks preparing for. But to understand the weight of that silence, you have to understand the night before, or rather, the weekend before, because that is where the thread began to unravel before I even knew I was holding it. It was a friend's wedding, the kind of affair that takes place in a converted barn upstate where the lighting is always too warm and the champagne flows just freely enough to loosen the ties we keep wrapped around our professional personas. I was 30 years old, sitting comfortably in my career as a senior marketing strategist for a tech firm that was currently undergoing a massive, somewhat turbulent acquisition, and I had no intention of letting my guard down. I had spent the better part of a decade building a reputation based on competence, on being the person who didn't make mistakes, who didn't get involved in office drama, and who certainly didn't mix personal indulgence with professional responsibility. But there was something about the music, something about the way the dust motes danced in the string lights, that made me feel less like a strategist and more like a woman who had been working too hard for too long. That was when I saw him. He was standing near the bar, not talking to anyone, just observing the room with a quiet intensity that mirrored my own, and when our eyes met, it wasn't with the predatory glance I was used to deflecting, but with a recognition of shared solitude. I walked over to him, emboldened by the music and the fact that I was out of my element, away from the city and the emails and the expectations. We talked for hours, or what felt like hours, about everything except what we did for a living. He was charming, yes, but it was a grounded charm, the kind that listens more than it speaks, and he made me laugh in a way that felt unfamiliar, a lightness I hadn't allowed myself in years. We flirted, certainly, there was a charge in the air that was undeniable, but it was respectful, bounded by the understanding that we were strangers meeting in a transient space. He told me his name was Julian, and I told him mine was Fiona, and when the night ended, we exchanged numbers with a promise to grab coffee sometime. A promise that felt safe because we lived in different worlds, or so I thought. I went home feeling a buzz that had nothing to do with the alcohol, a sense of possibility that I had tucked away for safekeeping, and I fell asleep with my phone on the nightstand, smiling at the ceiling. Then came Monday. I walked into the office with the usual rhythm, badge tapped against the reader, coffee in hand, ready to present the acquisition integration plan to the new leadership team. We had been told the new CEO was arriving today, a billionaire investor who had bought out our parent company, a figurehead who was supposed to be a ghost in the machine until the official announcement. I sat in the conference room, my slides ready, my team around me, feeling the usual pre-meeting adrenaline. Then the doors opened. The HR director walked in, followed by a man in a suit that cost more than my car, and my heart stopped, not because of the suit, but because of the face. It was Julian, the stranger from the barn, the man I had flirted with until midnight. The man who was now standing at the head of the table, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, a mask of professional neutrality that slammed down over his features so quickly I almost missed the flicker of recognition in his eyes. The silence I mentioned earlier wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room, and I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from embarrassment alone, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that the boundary I had so carefully maintained between my personal life and my career had just been obliterated. I didn't panic. I don't panic. I have trained myself for moments like this, moments where the ground shifts beneath you, and instead of crumbling, you dig your heels in and assess the structural integrity of the situation. I looked at him, and he looked at me, and in that second, 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Did he know who I was before he walked in? Did he remember the way I had laughed at his jokes? Did he remember the way I had touched his arm when I said goodbye? And more importantly, was this going to be used against me? In the corporate world, especially for a woman in my position, perception is everything, and the perception of favoritism or impropriety can be a career-ending virus. I stood up to introduce myself, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, and I said, "Welcome, Mr. Thorne," ignoring the way his name felt heavy on my tongue, ignoring the way his eyes narrowed slightly at the use of his surname. He nodded, a curt, professional gesture, and said, "Thank you, Miss Vance, let's begin." And so we began, but nothing was the same. The presentation went flawlessly, because I am good at what I do. And competence is the one armor that never fails you, but throughout the hour, I could feel his gaze on me, not predatory, but analytical, weighing me, measuring me, and I wondered if he was seeing the woman from the party or the employee in the room. When the meeting ended, everyone filed out, chatting nervously about the new regime, but I lingered, packing my laptop slowly, giving myself a moment to breathe, to recalibrate. He waited until the room was empty, then he walked over to the table, placing his hands on the surface, leaning in slightly. "You didn't mention you worked here," he said, his voice low, stripped of the charm from the weekend, replaced by a guarded caution. "Neither did you," I replied, keeping my tone even, matching his professionalism because that was the only safe ground we had left. "I didn't think it mattered," he said, and there was a hint of frustration there, a crack in the CEO facade. "It matters now," I said, and I picked up my bag. "I'll send the follow-up notes by end of day." I walked out before he could say anything else because I needed to get away from the scent of his cologne, which was now associated with power and authority rather than intimacy and escape. I went back to my office, closed the door, and sat in my chair, staring at the wall, processing the data. This was a complication, a significant one, but it was not a disaster unless I allowed it to be. I opened my email and began to draft the follow-up notes, forcing my mind to focus on the work, on the metrics, on the strategy, because work was solvable. People were not. But I couldn't ignore the elephant in the room, which was the fact that I had flirted with my new boss, and he had flirted back. And now we were bound by a hierarchy that made any continuation of that dynamic ethically impossible and professionally dangerous. I spent the rest of the day observing him from a distance, watching how he interacted with the other executives, noting that he was sharp, decisive, but also somewhat isolated. He didn't linger in the hallway chats. He didn't join the lunch group. He moved through the office like a shark, efficient and alone, and I wondered if that was who he really was, or if the man at the party was the real one, and this was the costume. Over the next few weeks, the tension became a constant hum in the background of my work life. He called me into his office twice for strategic reviews, and each time, the air was thick with unsaid things. We talked about market share and Q3 projections, but underneath the words, there was a current of awareness that neither of us acknowledged. I kept my interactions strictly professional, addressing him as Mr. Thorne, keeping my body language open but neutral, never leaning in, never smiling too much. I was building a wall, brick by brick, because I needed to protect myself. I needed to prove that I was here for my mind, not for any other reason. But I could see him struggling with it. I saw the way he would start to say something personal, then stop himself. I saw the way his eyes would linger on my face a second too long before he looked down at his papers. It was a dance, a careful, restrained dance where neither of us wanted to make the wrong move. The rumors started inevitably. In a company this size, nothing stays secret, and people noticed the frequency of our meetings. They noticed that I was the one leading the integration task force. They noticed that he deferred to my expertise in the executive sessions. Whispers began to circulate in the break room, harmless at first, then gaining weight. I heard someone say that I must have known him beforehand, that there was no way I got this level of access without a connection. It stung, not because it was true, but because it undermined my merit. I had worked too hard to be reduced to a rumor, to be seen as someone who climbed the ladder using personal favors rather than professional skill. I decided then that I would not address the rumors directly. Denial often sounds like guilt. Instead, I would let my work speak. I doubled down on my output. I stayed late. I refined the strategies. I made sure every email I sent to him was copied to the appropriate stakeholders, creating a paper trail of transparency. I was building a case for my own integrity, not for him, but for me, but internally I was hurting. I missed the man from the party. I missed the ease of our conversation. I missed the feeling of being seen not as a strategist or a subordinate, but as a woman. And I hated that I missed it. I hated that I was attracted to the man who held my career in his hands. It felt like a vulnerability I couldn't afford, so I buried it. I buried it under spreadsheets and timelines and KPIs. I told myself that once the acquisition was complete, once the dust settled, maybe things would change. But for now, survival was the only objective. Then came the escalation. It started with a business trip. We had to fly to Chicago for a merger negotiation, just the two of us and a legal advisor. It was unavoidable. The logistics had been set before he arrived, and changing them would look suspicious. So we flew. I sat in first class, he sat in the seat next to me, and for 3 hours we were trapped in a metal tube together. The legal advisor fell asleep halfway through the flight, leaving us in a bubble of quiet. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, pretending to work, but I could feel him shifting beside me. Finally, he tapped my arm. I took off the headphones and looked at him. "Fiona," he said, using my first name for the first time since Monday. It sounded different in this context, intimate and forbidden. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my voice low. "Stop it," he said. "Stop what? Pretending I'm a stranger. You're not a stranger to me, not after that night." I looked out the window at the clouds. That night was before I knew who you were, before I knew what this meant. "Does it have to mean anything?" he asked. "It means everything," I replied. "You're my boss, I report to you. If anyone thinks there is something going on, it compromises my position and your authority. I value my career, Julian. I value it more than I value a fling." He flinched at the word fling. "Is that what you think this was? A fling?" "I think it was a moment of lapse in judgment," I said, and the words tasted like ash. "A moment where I forgot where I was." "I haven't forgotten," he said quietly. "I haven't forgotten a single thing, but I also haven't forgotten that I need you on this team. I need your mind. I need your honesty. And I need you to know that I didn't know you worked here when I met you." I believed him. I could see it in his eyes, the frustration of the coincidence. But belief wasn't enough. Trust had to be earned, and in this environment, trust had to be documented. We landed in Chicago and went straight to the meeting. It was grueling. 12 hours of negotiation, shouting, compromises. I saw him in his element, fierce and protective of the company's interests, but also fair. He didn't bully the other side. He listened. He found common ground. I respected him professionally, which made the personal confusion even harder to manage. That night, we had dinner with the clients. I drank water. He drank whiskey. We sat across from each other, maintaining the professional mask, but under the table, our knees almost touched, and the proximity was electrifying. When the clients left, we walked back to the hotel together. The city was cold, the wind biting through our coats. We walked in silence until we reached the lobby. I turned to go to the elevator. "Fiona, wait," I stopped. "I'm not trying to compromise you," he said. "I'm not trying to use my position. I met you as a man. I want to know you as a man." "But you are in a position of power," I said. "That doesn't just go away because you want it to. The power dynamic exists whether we acknowledge it or not. And until that changes, until I am not directly reporting to you, nothing can happen." He nodded slowly. "I can work with that. But don't shut me out completely. Don't pretend I don't exist. I never said you didn't exist," I said. "I said we have to be smart." I went up to my room and stood by the window, looking out at the skyline. I wanted to call him. I wanted to invite him up. But I didn't, because I knew that if I did, I would lose myself. I would become the story everyone was already whispering, and I couldn't live with that. I couldn't live with the idea that my success was tainted by perception. So I chose clarity over desire. I chose the long game. When we returned to New York, the work intensified. The acquisition was hitting critical milestones, and the pressure was on. I noticed changes in him, though. He started leaving his door open when I came in. He started inviting other people into our meetings to ensure there were witnesses. He was actively working to protect my reputation, to sanitize our interactions so that there was no room for doubt. It was a subtle shift, but I noticed it. He was sacrificing his own privacy to ensure my safety. That mattered. It showed me that he understood the stakes. It showed me that he cared about my integrity as much as I did. But the distance was taking a toll. I could see it in the way he looked at me during the all-hands meetings, a longing that he couldn't quite hide. And I felt it too. The attraction hadn't faded. It had just been compressed, turned into something denser, more potent. I found myself analyzing his decisions, looking for signs of bias, but I found none. He treated me with the same rigorous standards as everyone else, perhaps even higher. He challenged my ideas. He pushed me to be better. He didn't give me easy wins. He gave me opportunities to prove myself, and I did. I led the team through the transition seamlessly. We hit every target. The stock price stabilized. The employees felt secure. I became indispensable, not because of who I knew, but because of what I delivered. And yet, the personal silence was loud. We didn't talk about the party. We didn't talk about the future. We existed in this suspended state of professional respect and personal restraint. It was exhausting. I started having trouble sleeping. I would lie in bed and replay the conversations, analyzing every word, every glance, wondering if I was making a mistake. Was I being too rigid? Was I letting fear dictate my life? I thought about my friends who told me to just go for it, who said life was short, who said love was rare. But they didn't understand the context. They didn't understand the power dynamics. They didn't understand that for a woman in my position, one misstep could undo 10 years of work. I wasn't just protecting my heart, I was protecting my livelihood. I was protecting my identity, so I kept going, I kept showing up, I kept doing the work. And then the turning point came. It was 3 months after the acquisition closed. The company was stable. The integration was complete. I had submitted my resignation. It wasn't because I was unhappy. It wasn't because I was failing. It was because I needed to remove the barrier. I needed to be free of the hierarchy so that if something happened between us, it would be on equal ground. I had lined up a new job, a competitor, a step up in title, a fresh start. I hadn't told him yet. I wanted to hand in the letter, walk out, and then see where we stood. I scheduled a meeting with him to discuss the post-integration roadmap. It was a Friday afternoon. The office was quiet. Most people had left early for the weekend. I walked into his office with the envelope in my bag. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned when I entered. "You look serious," he said. "I am," I replied. I sat down. "I have something to tell you." He sat opposite me, leaning forward, his hands clasped. "Okay. I'm leaving," I said. The words hung in the air. He didn't move. He didn't blink. "Leaving?" he asked. "Yes, my contract is up. I've accepted a position elsewhere." "Why?" he asked, and his voice was tight. "Is it because of me? Is it because of this?" "It's because of me," I said. "I need to grow. I need to be in a place where my history isn't complicated. I need to be free." He looked down at his hands. "I see, so this is goodbye." "For now," I said. I handed him the letter. He took it, but he didn't open it. He just held it. "I wanted to tell you in person," I said, "because you deserve that, because despite everything, I respect you." He looked up and his eyes were wet. "I didn't want it to end like this, Fiona. I didn't want you to feel like you had to leave to breathe." "I don't feel like I have to leave to breathe," I said. "I feel like I have to leave to be honest. With myself, with you, with everyone." He stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped a few feet away from me. "You know I care about you," he said. "You know this isn't just business for me." "I know," I said. "And that's why I have to go. Because if I stay, I'll always wonder if I stayed for the wrong reasons. And if we ever tried something, I'd always wonder if it was because you were my boss. I need to know that if we are together, it's because we choose each other, not because we are stuck in the same building." He nodded slowly. "You're right, you're absolutely right." He took a deep breath. "But I'm not going to let you go without a fight. I'm not asking you to stay," I said. "I'm asking you to understand." "I understand," he said. "But I want you to know something. I knew who you were before the Monday meeting." I froze. "What?" He walked back to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a file. "I did my due diligence before I took the job. I looked at the leadership team. I saw your name. I saw your photo. I recognized you from the party. I knew it was you before I walked into that conference room." My heart hammered against my ribs. "You knew?" I knew. "Then why didn't you say anything? Why did you let me suffer through the uncertainty? Why did you let me build walls?" "Because I wanted to see what you would do," he said softly. "I wanted to see if you were the woman I met at the party, or if you were just someone looking for an advantage. I wanted to see if you would try to use me. I wanted to see if you would crumble under the pressure. And you didn't. You worked harder, you protected your integrity, you protected us. You proved that you are exactly who I thought you were." I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by understanding. "You tested me." "I evaluated the situation," he corrected. "Just like you did. You were gathering data, you were assessing risk. So was I needed to know if I could trust you with my company, and with my heart. I stood up, my legs shaking. That was a risk, Julian. You could have lost me. I could have quit months ago. I know, he said, but I had a feeling you wouldn't. I had a feeling you were too smart for that. Too principled. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the vulnerability he had been hiding behind the CEO mask. He wasn't just a billionaire boss. He was a man who was lonely, who was guarded, who was looking for someone who could stand beside him without being intimidated by his power. And I realized that I had been doing the same thing. I had been looking for someone who respected my power enough not to try to diminish it. So what happens now? I asked. Now, he said, now you go to your new job, you shine. You do what you do best, and I wait. You'll wait, I'll wait, because I'm not going to find anyone else like you, and I don't want to, I want you. When you're ready, when the dust settles, when you're free. I picked up my bag. I didn't say goodbye, I just nodded. I walked out of the office, and this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was light. It was full of possibility. I left the company 2 weeks later. The transition was smooth. My team was sad to see me go, but they understood. I started the new job, and it was challenging, and it was exciting, and it was mine. I didn't think about him every day, but I thought about him often. I thought about the way he had looked at me when he admitted he knew. I thought about the way he had respected my decision to leave. I thought about the promise he had made. Months passed. The seasons changed. I settled into my new role. I made new friends. I built a new life. And then, one evening, I got a call. It was him. No greeting, just, "Are you free?" "I'm always free for you," I said, and I meant it. "Meet me at the barn," he said. "The same one, the same one." I drove upstate. It was autumn this time. The leaves were turning gold and red. The air was crisp. I parked the car and walked toward the entrance. He was there, standing in the same spot where we had met. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a sweater. He looked like a man, not a CEO. I walked up to him. "Hello, Fiona," he said. "Hello, Julian. No titles this time," I said. "No titles," he agreed. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, letting the time apart settle into place. "I missed you," I said. "I missed you too. Did you wait?" I asked. I waited. "Did you see anyone else?" "No, did you?" "No." He smiled, and it was the same smile from the party, the one that had started it all. "So where do we go from here?" he asked. "We go slow," I said. "We go careful. We don't mix work and play. We keep our boundaries." "Agreed," he said, "and we tell the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He took my hand. His palm was warm, his grip was firm. I looked down at our joined hands, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't a movie. This was real. It was built on foundation of trust, on respect, on the hard work of navigating complexity with integrity. We walked into the barn. The music was playing. The lights were warm. But this time, we weren't strangers. We were partners. We sat at a table in the corner and talked. We talked about the months apart. We talked about the fears we had held. We talked about the future. He told me about the pressure of running the company. I told me about the challenges of the new job. We listened. We didn't try to fix each other. We just held space. And in that space, love grew. Not the frantic, desperate love of movies, but the steady, enduring love of adults who know what they want and know what it costs. I realized then that the misunderstanding hadn't been about who he was. It had been about whether we could trust each other to be honest. And we had passed the test. We had chosen clarity over anger. We had chosen truth over convenience. And because of that, we had earned this. As the night went on, the party around us faded into the background. It was just us. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a desperate kiss. It was a promise, a confirmation. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "I'm glad you left," he whispered. "I'm glad I did too," I said, "because now I'm here by choice. Not by circumstance." He nodded, "By choice." We stayed until the lights went out. Then we drove back to the city together. He dropped me off at my apartment. He didn't try to come up. He didn't push. He just walked me to the door and kissed me goodnight. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "I know you will." I watched him walk back to his car. I watched him drive away. Then I went inside. I locked the door. I leaned against it and closed my eyes. I felt whole. I felt safe. I felt loved. And I knew that whatever came next, we would handle it together. Because we had already handled the hardest part. We had handled the truth. The weeks that followed were a blur of normalcy. We dated like normal people. We went to dinner. We went to movies. We cooked at home. We didn't talk about work unless we wanted to. We kept our worlds separate but connected. It was healthy, it was balanced, and it was beautiful. My friends noticed the change in me. I was lighter, I was happier. I wasn't carrying the weight of the secret anymore. I wasn't guarding my heart. I was open, and he was too. He told me that running the company was easier now that he didn't have to hide his feelings. He said that knowing I was out there, happy and successful, gave him peace. And knowing that I chose him, despite everything, gave him confidence. We weren't perfect. We had arguments, we had disagreements. But we handled them with the same emotional intelligence we had used to navigate the boss-employee dynamic. We talked, we listened, we resolved. We didn't let resentment build. We didn't let misunderstandings fester. We cut them off at the root. 1 year later, we went back to the barn. It was the anniversary of the day we met. We stood in the same spot. He got down on one knee. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. He just held out the ring. "Fiona, will you marry me?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tested me, who had waited for me, who had respected me. I looked at the partner who had chosen clarity over anger, just like I had. "Yes," I said, "yes." He put the ring on my finger. It fit perfectly. We hugged, we cried, we laughed, and then we danced. There was no music, but we danced anyway. We moved together in the quiet barn, under the string lights, in the dust motes. And I knew that this was it. This was the resolution. This was the happy ending. Not because there were no problems, but because we had the tools to solve them. Not because we were perfect, but because we were honest. I thought back to that Monday morning. The silence, the fear, the guard. It felt like a lifetime ago, and in a way it was. That woman was gone. She had been replaced by someone stronger. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who knew that love wasn't about losing yourself, but about finding someone who helps you keep yourself. Julian spun me around and I laughed. The sound echoed in the barn. It was a sound of freedom. It was a sound of joy. It was the sound of a woman who had navigated the storm and come out the other side, whole and healed. We drove home together. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. We held hands across the console. We watched the city lights approach. We knew what waited for us. A life together, a partnership, a future built on trust. And as I looked at him, driving silently beside me, I knew that I had made the right choice. I had chosen clarity. I had chosen truth. And I had chosen love. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The story of us wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the power. It wasn't about the title. It was about the moment I decided not to run. It was about the moment he decided to wait. It was about the bridge we built over the gap of misunderstanding. And now we were walking across it together, hand in hand, step by step, into the light. I remember thinking, as I drifted off to sleep that night, that I was grateful for the misunderstanding. Because without it, we wouldn't have had to fight for this. We wouldn't have had to prove ourselves. We wouldn't have known what we were made of. The friction had created the heat had forged the bond, and the bond was unbreakable. I closed my eyes, I felt his arm around me, I felt safe, I felt loved, I felt home, and that was the only title that mattered. Not CEO, not strategist, not boss, not employee, just partners, just us. And in the quiet of the night, with the city humming outside, I knew that this was the beginning, not the end. The beginning of a life built on the solid ground of truth, and I couldn't wait to see what came next. I couldn't wait to wake up and do it all over again. Because now, I knew that no matter what happened, we would handle it. Together. With intelligence, with grace, with love. And that was the best story of all. The story of two people who chose to understand instead of judge. Who chose to communicate instead of assume. Who chose to love instead of fear. And in choosing, they found everything they were looking for. They found each other. And they found themselves. And that, I realized as I drifted into sleep, was the only resolution that truly mattered. The rest was just details. The rest was just noise. The love was the signal, and the signal was clear. It was strong. It was ours. And it would last. I know it will, because we built it to last. We built it to withstand the storms. We built it to weather the changes. We built it on the foundation of who we really are. Not who we pretend to be, not who the world says we should be, but who we are. Flawed, human, real and loved, truly loved. And that makes all the difference. That makes everything worth it. Every moment of doubt, every moment of fear, every moment of silence, it was all leading to this. To us, to now, to here, and I wouldn't change a thing, I wouldn't change a single thing. Because it brought me to him, and it brought him to me, and that is the only thing that counts. The only thing that ever counted. So I sleep, I rest, I dream, and I know that when I wake up, he will be there, and I will be there. And we will be us, and that is enough. It has always been enough, and it always will be. The end, or rather the beginning, the true beginning, the one that matters, the one we earned, the one we chose, the one we live every day together.